Today I want to talk about the Tattooist of Auschwitz, and before we get going, I do need to warn you, the content in this video is going to be a little heavier. We are talking about the Holocaust and internment camps, and the terrible tragedies that people suffered while they were there. So if those sorts of things bother you, or you're really sensitive to that kind of discussion, definitely skip this one, go to something lighter and happier. I make plenty of book reviews, this may just not be the one for you. So the Tattooist of Auschwitz is based on a real-life story that was relayed by a man who actually survived Birkenau and Auschwitz, and relayed that information to Heather Morris in his later life just before he died. Obviously she had to fill in some of the blanks, but the story is based on what he told her. So let me read you what they said about that. This is a work of fiction based on the first-hand testimony of one Auschwitz survivor. It is not an authoritative record of the events of the Holocaust. There are many accounts that document the facts of that terrible history in far more detail than can be justified in a novel, and I would encourage the interested reader to seek them out. Lael encountered many more guards and prisoners during his time at Auschwitz-Birkenau than are described in these pages. In some instances, I have created characters that represent more than one individual and have simplified certain events. While some encounters and conversations here have been imagined, that the events in this history occurred largely as described is not in doubt, and the information presented as fact has been sourced and researched. So the Tattooist of Auschwitz is based on Lael Sokolov's experience in Birkenau, Auschwitz, and sort of what happened to him and around him, and how he and a few others were able to persevere, and what they had to do to survive. Obviously this was a heavier read, and I find that I am struggling to actually talk about it. I've restarted this video probably 15 times. It's difficult to balance things that are so unrefutably real, things that have impacted the entire world culturally on some level, and then it's just bizarre to me that some people still say that these things didn't happen. I don't understand it. I just don't understand. I'm not going to go into a deep plot review, partly because of YouTube and the restrictions there, and partly just because I'm not comfortable discussing those sorts of things with people that I don't know very well. Like, you guys are great and everything, but we're not that close. And these topics are really sensitive, and I'm not comfortable discussing it in detail. I am not a knowledgeable person on this particular subject matter, and so I don't feel that it's appropriate for me to comment on, oh, this is the way it was written, but this is how it actually happened, and that sort of thing. Like, it's just not my place. What I do want to talk about is the humanity that is relayed in this book. So we follow Lael, who is the main character, and the name of the man who relayed this story to the author. And we sort of follow how he wound up in Birkenau, and sort of how dire everything was, and how jarring it was, and as it sort of started to sink in, you know, they were told to submit themselves so that their families would be spared, that all of the young men were supposed to show up to these railway stations to be sent off to work for the government. So he thought he was going to work. So he packed a bag, he wore his suit, and then they were crammed into these cattle trucks on a train and sent to this concentration camp. And this is before anybody really knew that those existed, or what they were, or what they were for. And they called them work camps, but what they really were places to break spirits and break people down. And the work that they were doing was basically building their own prisons and building their own demise, basically. They built the crematoriums. They built these terrible barracks that they had to live in. They were building the facilities that were then used to oppress and restrain and control and kill them. But they didn't know it at the time. And watching Lael and those around him sort of navigate that knowledge as it came to them, like as it started coming in, yeah, it was hard to read. He wound up being the tattooist, the person who actually engraved the numbers on people's arms, because he was clever, and the guy who was doing it before tapped him and basically said, your ego, your cool and calm demeanor is going to get you killed, but I need somebody with a level head. You're the guy for me. Come here. And he basically apprenticed this guy. It's my understanding that it is sinful to indelibly mark your skin in Jewish culture. I'm not Jewish, but that's my understanding. It's from Leviticus, I think. And so in addition to the fact that he was marking them for sorting like you would brand cattle, he was also doing this thing that is culturally repugnant to them specifically as a people. So it was sort of a double tap, that he was helping facilitate their own downfall and also perpetrating this sin against his own people. So there was a lot of guilt there. The humanity in Lael, and watching him process, I have to do this in order to survive. And also, if I don't do it as gently as I possibly can, and with as much kindness and sensitivity as I can, someone else will do it, and they may not care. So it was sort of his way of accepting the job as the tattooist, was sort of his way of alleviating this really traumatic experience to the best of his ability, understanding that it was going to happen anyway. And so he did his best to make it as gentle as possible, as inoffensive as possible when something is that offensive at its core. And just sort of watching him sort of come to the realization that he could at least make this one thing less painful, more bearable. So while Lael is there, a few months after arriving, he tattoos a young woman, and he is instantly smitten with her. And you sort of get the impression that it is a love at first sight situation, but you don't really know if outside of that situation, if those two people would have been drawn to each other, or if it was a thing that they both used to cope, that their manifested love for this other person was their reason for living, their reason for continuing to try, their reason for continuing to put forth effort towards their own survival. When you're in such a dire situation like that, and it's just constant, year after year onslaught of stripping away your humanity, taking away all of your reasons for living, you have to find something to grasp onto to make you want to live. Because the second you give up, you stop living. For Lael, and for this girl that he fell in love with, I think her name was Gerda or Greta or something like that. For these two young people, it was their love for each other. And stolen glances across the compound, and as they sort of were marched by one another, like brushing hands or stealing moments of affection when they could get away from the side of the guard. And this was the thing that sort of carried them through. So when I picked the book up, watching a love story unfold was not what I expected. But because it was used as the mechanism for inspiring his desire to continue to survive, it all made sense. And knowing that it was the real life love story of these two real people who actually existed and actually went through that, it made it all the more poignant. Like I said, it was a difficult read. It's even harder to talk about than it was to read, and I'm not sure why that is. But yeah, it's worth reading. The way that it's written, it's well written. The characters are rich and interesting and complex, and it's not so much the horrible things that are happening to and around them, or the horrible things that they're doing to each other in order to get by. Although that is hard, it's the justifications that they make to themselves, and the the way that they're mentally and emotionally processing this information, that is what adds weight to the story. It's the characters within it, not the things in the story itself. And although tragic, although the things that were happening and were perpetrated against people were tragic, the impact that it had on the people mentally and emotionally was the hardest part to process. So that's about all I'm comfortable talking about. I'm already having a hard time. So if you are interested in a tragic and somehow also heartwarming story about this particular subject matter, this is definitely a good choice. It's hard to read. It's a heavy read. It will weigh on your heart, but it's still worth reading. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and of course if you like the way that I present information, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell down below. You can find all of my social media contacts in the description, and of course if you want to keep up with me and the progress I'm making on my current novel, you can do that at effywritesbooks.com. Thank you so much for watching, have an excellent day, and I'll see you next time.